Dear colleagues and friends, all national focal points for periodical reporting across the Asia-Pacific region. A very good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to you all. This is Dr. Feng Jin, Chief of Asia-Pacific Unit of the World Heritage Center, speaking from UNESCO headquarters in Paris. First of all, welcome to all, and thank you for attending the 6th Thursday morning training session organized by the World Heritage Center for the periodical reporting exercise in the Asia and the Pacific region. This week, we begin our in-depth sessions dedicated to specific topics addressed in the periodical reporting questionnaire. Today's session focuses on one of the core concepts of the World Heritage Convention, Outstanding Universal Value, or we call it OUV, as the most important element that determines the inscription of a property on the World Heritage List. It will also be a guiding thread throughout your monitoring and reporting, especially for Section 2 of the questionnaire. And we will review this important concept. We will review this important concept and see its applications in the periodical reporting exercise in today's session. Just a few words to remind you to this key concept. For the inscription of a culture-nature or culture-nature mixed property on the World Heritage List, the advisory bodies, means ICOMOS and IUCN, evaluate first the outstanding universal value, response to the criteria defined in the operational guidelines, and also that satisfies the conditions of authenticity and integrity. And then whether the legal protection is adequate, whether the state of conservation is acceptable, and whether the management system is satisfactory. So I'm very happy that to have some dear colleagues from the advisory bodies join us today for this presentation, in addition to the Asia-Pacific periodical reporting team that you have gotten to know over the past few weeks already. First, I have Ms. Crystal Buckley, representing the International Council on Monument and Sites, ICOMOS International. And then Mr. Clemens Cooper, representing the International Union for Conservation of Nature, IUCN. And later we may be joined by representatives of ICRON. Together, they will deliver a presentation on OUV and how to define attributes of OUV, both in general and specifically for your questionnaires. My colleagues from the World Heritage Center will also provide an overview of lessons learned from other regions on this topic and of the implications that attributes of OUV will have for the rest of your reporting exercise. At the end of the session, we have planned some time to respond to questions from our participants in this morning's session. As in previous weeks, this session will be recorded, where it is organized for the national focal points in the Asia and the Pacific region. We encourage you to share this video with site managers in your respective countries, along with all the training documents A link to this session and a copy of the presentation materials will be shared shortly after our session for your ease of action. Before we dive into the OUV presentation, I will pass the floor to my colleagues from the World Heritage Center, Mr. Michel Verne and Mr. Valentino Etouard, who will report on the progress with the exercise so far and address a few logistic and practical aspects of your reporting exercise. Michel and Valentino, you have the floor, and then to be followed by ICOMOS and IUCN. Thank you all.
Good morning, Feng. Thank you very much. I think what we can do to start with regards to the progress, I believe that at this point, the majority of the national focal points with the site managers of the respective state parties have been sent an update on the progress made within the questionnaire. This information includes the percentage completion for both sections 1 for the national focal points and section 2 for the site managers, and also has information on when the questionnaire has been accessed as well. We have sent these reminders to all national focal points and site managers in hopes that it encourages those who have started but may want to have a little bit additional pressure to encourage everybody to participate and fill in their questionnaires. For some, it has been incredibly successful working with site managers and national focal points to fill in the information of the questionnaire, and some still have difficulties accessing the questionnaire, whether it be through internet access or with difficulties with a login. If there are any difficulties with logins and or other concerns, we encourage you to send an email as soon as possible to wh-periodicreporting@unesco.org. We will put this in the chat for you so that you can have this email if you don't have it already. Unless, and I think that should be it, unless Valentino has anything in particular to add with regards to the current updates on the questionnaire. Valentino?
Good morning,
Valentino, you're a little bit soft, muffled.
I don't know. Can you hear me now?
It's a little bit better, but not by much.
I'm sorry. I will just send some message.
I'm sorry, Valentino. It's very difficult to hear you.
Okay, but perhaps let's move on, Valentino. We still have time for you to deliver the rest of your message during your next intervention later on today. Let me then begin. First of all, good morning, everybody. It's very lovely to see all of you again this morning for our first in-depth content session. I wanted to begin the session before our advisory bodies delve into the definition and the application of the concept of OUV. I wanted to have a brief look at how OUV appears in the World Heritage Convention and how it shapes the exercise that you are all undertaking for the next number of months. And so let me start a very quick presentation. If it wants to load. Very good. And there's a part of the convention that I find is often a little bit overlooked and is actually quite useful, namely the recitals of the convention. So the very beginning of it, which says the following thing. Considering that parts of the cultural or natural heritage are of outstanding interest and therefore need to be preserved as part of the world heritage of, today we would say, humankind as a whole. And I think that is quite possibly the single most important opening sentence of our convention, because this means that what we do goes beyond the borders of national interests, and that what brings us together is exceptional heritage that is of relevance for all of us. And I'm sure that our colleagues from the advisory bodies will give us more information about this, but what constitutes outstanding universal value and what makes something outstanding is defined in a bit more detail in paragraph 49 of the operational guidelines. But the recitals go on, and they say that it is incumbent on the international community as a whole to participate in the protection of the cultural and natural heritage of outstanding universal value. And I think that is the second thing that is structuring our work today, which is that responsibility for World Heritage is not limited to the national level. It is shared with all of us. Because the value is outstanding, the responsibility applies the same way than the relevance of the heritage, which is to say that it is shared in by all of us, and it is our joint responsibility to address it, which is why we have many different kinds of reporting. And at the outset of the convention, the idea is that although this heritage is essential to many of us, it is not necessarily without its problems, and it is not necessarily unthreatened. And that's the very beginning of this paragraph, which says that, considering that in view of the magnitude and gravity of the new dangers threatening natural and cultural and natural heritage of outstanding interest, and it's reflected furthermore at the very beginning of our convention, which begins by noting that cultural heritage and natural heritage are increasingly threatened. And we have to bear in mind this dates back to 1972, and we can reflect that in that regard, very little has changed. There is an increasing amount of threat with destruction, not only by the traditional causes of decay, but also by changing social and economic conditions. And this could just as well be in the opening speech of a chairperson of the committee today. And that, for me, is one of the more interesting aspects that show the continued relevance of this convention, which is that our work is ongoing. It's never finished once and for all, and we always have to adapt because of the exceptional nature of the heritage, but also the exceptional threats that can be affecting it at all times. And we also have to consider the following paragraph, which says that the deterioration or disappearance of any item of cultural or natural heritage constitutes a harmful impoverishment of heritage of all nations of the world. And this ties in with this idea of outstanding universal value, which is that shared responsibility also means that anything that affects it has an impact on the heritage of every nation, regardless of whether or not this heritage is located on their physical boundaries. We all share into the World Heritage List, and anything that happens to a property on the World Heritage List is a loss for all of us. And this is echoed, of course, in the rest of the convention. We all know Article 4, I think, quite well, which says that each state party to the convention recognizes that the duty of ensuring the identification, protection, conservation, presentation, and transmission to future generations of cultural and natural heritage of outstanding universal value belongs primarily to that state. And that is one of the main ideas that result in the questionnaires that you have been filling out over the years, that all the states parties to the convention are expected to do their utmost with any assistance that is required to preserve and to share their properties of outstanding universal value with the rest of the international communities. And those cases that have problems or where some threats may be affecting the properties of whatever kind are brought to the attention of the committee via us at the World Heritage Center as the Secretariat, and are reviewed if necessary during the regular sessions of the committee. And that constitutes reactive monitoring. The exercise that brings us all together, periodic reporting, is what we call, is the other monitoring aspect of the convention, because it concerns every single property. And the main goal of section 2 of the questionnaire, which concerns each and every World Heritage property, is to ensure that outstanding universal value is protected at the local level. And section 1 also discusses how OUV and all of this exceptional heritage is protected at the national level. So OUV is at the cornerstone of just about everything that you do. Article 29 of the convention has to do with our exercise at the moment, which says that the states parties to this convention shall, in the report which they submit to the General Conference of UNESCO, give information on the legislative and administrative provisions which they have adopted and other action which they have taken for the application of this convention, which is a lengthy way of saying what they do for World Heritage and OUV, and provide details of the experience that they have acquired in this field. And this is something that we'll have occasion to discuss again in future sessions, which is the sharing of good practice examples, which is something that we have tried to reintroduce with more strength. So a good understanding of OUV, how it's applied, and how it can be protected is essential for your reporting exercise, but also for the management of heritage in general. This definition of OUV is covered in the questionnaire in Chapter 3, which deals with the statement of outstanding universal value. Excuse me. So that we all agree on what constitutes OUV, each property inscribed on the World Heritage List should have a statement of outstanding universal value, which has a template that is set in the operational guidelines and which is adopted by the World Heritage Committee, either at the time of inscription or retrospectively for properties inscribed further in the past of the convention. You will be asked about the definition of the OUV in the questionnaire. Just for your reference, you can find, so this is a statement of outstanding universal value that you can see on the screen. I believe it's the one for Kathmandu Valley. And it is on the website of the World Heritage Center. You will find it on the tab, on the web page for each property, on the first tab of them. And you will also find on the Documents tab, in the decisions section, if a statement has been adopted retrospectively, you will have an item, for instance, here, 36,8E, adoption of retrospective statements of outstanding universal value, and there you have access to the text of the statement of OUV, which is adopted by the committee and therefore is more or less set in stone at this point. You will be asked in the questionnaire to validate the statement of OUV. In most cases, that will be a very straightforward question. If there are any doubts, if you click on update, you will have a rundown of any procedure that is needed. We'll come back to this at the end of the session very briefly. And so this idea of OUV, it gets detailed a little bit more because we don't have just the statement. You are also asked to list the key attributes of outstanding universal value and to give an assessment of their condition. And it's suggested to focus on 5 key attributes. And so how these attributes are defined on the basis of the statement of OUV provides an excellent link to the presentation that our representatives of the advisory bodies, Ms. Crystal Buckley and Mr. Clemens Cooper, are going to give us now. So I'm going to stop my presentation and hand over the floor to them. Thank you very much.
It seems
We
like
can't hear you, Clemens.
Yes.
Mike.
Sorry. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for the introduction and the invitation to participate in this training session, this first one of this series on the content of the periodic reporting questionnaire. It's a pleasure to join you all today and also to see that we have quite an impressive number of participants at this session. Krista and myself will be going through some key concepts that have just been touched upon by Anatole, and I think it's also very useful to always recap also parts of the convention text, as we've just seen in Anatole's presentation, because the convention text is at the end of the day the foundation, the fundament on which we are working here. So we'll be now focusing more on the operational guidelines of the convention, which you could perhaps call the rule book, which is there to implement, to operationalize the key provisions of the World Heritage Convention. So I'll be starting with running through outstanding universal value, recapping, refreshing this concept in the context of the operational guidelines. Crystal will then continue with that. So we've divided that in two parts between the two of us, and proceed to examples for cultural sites. And in the end of our presentation, I will then provide a brief example for a natural site, how you could approach the outstanding universal value of a specific site in the framework of this periodic reporting exercise, and this chapter 3, in particular chapter 3.2 of section 2 of the periodic reporting questionnaire. And in the end, we'll be happy to take any questions you may have. So I would just start now with a screen share, hoping that this will work also with a connection. So I suppose most of us, at least in Europe, will be working from home. So I think this is working, at least on my screen. Could you please quickly confirm?
It is for us as well.
Yeah, it's very good.
Great, thanks. So now I need, okay, it's just a bit different in Teams for clicking on the next slide. So just to recap one point that Anatole has just mentioned in one of the paragraphs quoted. So here we have a list of the duties of the state party under this convention. It's the identification of World Heritage, the protection, the conservation, the presentation, and the transmission to future generations. And I would argue that the four-letter points, protection, conservation, presentation, and transmission to future generations, are the four duties where the periodic reporting exercise is very important for all these four points. So the next slide, well, that's probably a very well-known and famous picture, which really illustrates quite well what is outstanding universal value. You see on this picture the highest peak on Earth. So this is really an absolutely outstanding and special place, and for all of humanity, for all of us. This transcends in its significance the boundaries, the national boundaries of states. So this is expressed in paragraph 49 of the operational guidelines, which reads that outstanding universal value means cultural and or natural significance, which is so exceptional as to transcend national boundaries and to be of common importance for present and future generations of all humanity. As such, the permanent protection of this heritage is of the highest importance to the international community as a whole. And the committee defines the criteria for the inscription of properties on World Heritage list, and there we have 10. So to illustrate that, outstanding universal value is basically standing on 3 pillars. It's the criteria I've just mentioned that are outlined in the operational guidelines paragraph 77. It's integrity and authenticity, on which we'll be providing more details in a minute. And thirdly, it is the protection and management, the latter 2 outlined in operational guidelines paragraph 78. And it is important to note that all the 3 aspects are equally important to ensure that outstanding universal value is in place. So the paragraph 77 of the operational guidelines says the committee considers a property as having outstanding universal value if the property meets 1 or more of these 10 criteria. I will not go into each of the criteria, this would take too long. And paragraph 78 on the 2 other pillars states that to be deemed of outstanding universal value, a property must also meet the conditions of integrity and/or authenticity and must have an adequate protection and management system for its safeguarding. So if one of these pillars, one of these elements is not in place or compromised, OUV is also compromised. So all these three elements, criteria, integrity and authenticity, and protection and management are equally important. In brief, OUV is the central concept of the World Heritage System. It is at the heart of World Heritage nominations and reporting, so also at the heart of periodic reporting. And it is also a useful framework that can support the management of World Heritage sites. Another example, also not too far from the first one. So what I will be doing now is to go through the elements of the Statement of Outstanding Universal Value. The Statement of Outstanding Universal Value tries to capture and describe these values and is structured along these 3 pillars I have just outlined. It starts with a brief synthesis, which in a way sets the scene with to be responded to: the what, the where, the when, and the why. So in this case, the Kanchenjunga National Park exhibits one of the widest altitudinal range of any protected area worldwide. That's already a strong statement showing the international, the global significance of this site. And then the brief synthesis goes on with listing further elements that are crucial for this site. I would not go into detail here, including India's most significant biodiversity concentrations. So the next section is describing, it's outlining the criteria. The criteria respond to the question, why is this place important? So in that case, we have a mixed site which has been inscribed under both cultural and natural criteria. In this case, criterion 3, 6, and natural criterion 7, and criterion 10. The subsequent section is integrity, which is now the second pillar we've just seen. To summarize this section, one could say it responds to the question, does it tell the whole story? Integrity means the extent to which the property includes all elements necessary to express its outstanding universal value. is of adequate size to ensure the complete representation of the features and does not suffer from adverse effects of development and neglect. So to take the example of outstanding universal value, the property encompasses a unique mountain system comprising of peaks, glaciers, lakes, rivers, and an entire range of ecologically linked biological elements, which ensures the sustainability of unique mountain ecosystem functions. So in other words, what's put here in bold describes the intactness of the site. So if you want to break down integrity into two further aspects, the first one would be, is the site intact? Is it fully functioning? Is it viably functioning? And secondly, is the site complete? Does it include all elements that are necessary to express its outstanding universal value? So I believe from here, Christelle will take over with talking about the authenticity of sites, which is an element that only applies to cultural sites and not natural sites.
Yes, hello everyone, and just let me find my presentation. I'm also very inexperienced with Teams, but let me see what I can do.
Perfect.
I'm wondering if
we can see the presentation. Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks, Michelle.
Awesome.
So let me begin. And first of all, I just put a quick slide here, which is for the benefit of the recording, where about ICOMOS, because I haven't really introduced ICOMOS to you before, but we are the International Council on Monuments and Sites. We are responsible to the World Heritage Committee as an advisory body for cultural heritage assessments and to offer our technical advice and so on. And of course, we work very closely with IUCN in that process. So let me pick up the story that my colleague from IUCN has already begun. It's still talking about the same mixed World Heritage property. After we've looked already at the criteria for its inscription, and he has explained already the various dimensions of the requirement of integrity, we also need to look for cultural heritage places and properties at the question of authenticity, which is a shorthand asks, is it truthful? Does it really have the qualities that are claimed in the proposed outstanding universal value? So again, authenticity only applies to cultural properties, but integrity applies to both natural and cultural properties. And authenticity applies to the cultural aspects of mixed properties. So authenticity is a very challenging concept. It's constantly evolving, and it's especially evolving in relation to the challenges of cultural diversity. So authenticity is very much dependent on the cultural context in which the heritage exists. So sometimes it's seen to be a very static or rigid concept, but in fact it should be applied in a very context-specific way to the culture that we're dealing with when we look at cultural heritage. So let me move quickly, and then we can have no doubt some questions if they arise. So in relation to the authenticity of this particular property, which Clemens has already introduced, you can see here the way in which the authenticity has been described in the Statement of Outstanding Universal Value. So sometimes we're talking about tangible or physical aspects of the property, but often we're not. We're talking about traditional knowledge, we're talking about continuing traditional and cultural practices, we're talking about things that are sometimes labelled very generally as intangible, including ritual and spirituality. And often these are very entangled or joined together with the natural heritage of these properties, which makes them very special. And then we move to the next pillar of outstanding universal value. I'm hoping that you can all remember the diagram that Clemens has shown, because when we talk about the protection and management requirements of World Heritage properties, we're talking about how all these things that we've described, these values that have been identified as being so extremely important that the global community should take some shared responsibility for them, which is what do we need to do to assure its future? And here on the slide, you'll see many of the things which I'm sure as focal points and site managers, many of you are very familiar with, which is the frameworks for legal protection and management requirements in the World Heritage System. So we talk a lot about legal protection, management plans, management systems. How have you arranged different decision makers and stakeholders to contribute to the management of the property? We talk a lot about community involvement, visitor management, sustainable tourism, disaster management, heritage impact assessment. Many, many issues come into these ideas of protection and management. So here you'll see some of the text taken again from this particular statement of outstanding universal value for this very precious mixed site that we chose for the example. You can see how the protection is described, of course, in much longer text than can fit on the screen, and then the way in which the property is managed. Who does the management? How do they do the management? How do they know how to make good decisions when things crop up and change is contemplated? And as this slide suggests, the management and protection of World Heritage properties need to deal with the long-term challenges that sustaining the values of the property might pose. So sometimes we talk about pressures, sometimes we talk about threats, vulnerabilities, we talk about negative changes, but we also talk about positive changes, and we talk about ways to ensure the future commitment is being honoured by everyone involved. So you can see here that this is where we're really starting to get very close to the activities involved in the periodic reporting process. I just wanted, Anatole already spoke very well about the statement of outstanding universal value. Most properties on the World Heritage List today have a statement of outstanding universal value. Sometimes they've been applied much more recently than they were inscribed in the list, but today we always have a statement of outstanding universal value at or around the time that a property is entered in the World Heritage List, so that it's really clear to everyone what it is we're trying to do at these often very complex places. So we consider the statement of outstanding universal value to be of great benefit to everyone involved in the conservation of the property, because it allows this clear understanding of why the property is of outstanding universal value. It gives direction to management by indicating the attributes of the property to be maintained. It can guide the assessment of the state of conservation of the property and is an essential reference point for monitoring for the World Heritage Committee, for the site managers, for the national governments and the advisory bodies. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the idea of attributes, because I know that causes people some confusion, but I'm wondering if I should hand back to Clemens first so he can do his examples first. Do you want to do that, Clemens?
I think it would be best if you would go ahead.
If I just keep going? Okay.
It's already very
All
concrete.
right.
So you start with the concept.
Okay.
Thanks.
So I'll keep going. Thanks for your patience while we organize their smooth performance here this evening. I wanted to talk about this. Before that, I wanted to mention that both IUCN and ICOMOS have published a growing number of what we call thematic studies to assist states parties and focal points to understand the comparative contexts of their World Heritage proposals and properties. And you can see that a number of them have been published for and in relation to the cultural heritage of Asia and the Pacific. And both of us have websites that where you can download these studies free of charge. But let me return to this idea of attributes. So you would have seen this chart earlier in the presentation from Clemens. It's the one we all use a lot. And just to remember, the outstanding universal value is made up of all of these things. Sometimes there's a sense that it's just about criteria, but it's actually not. It's about sustaining the integrity and authenticity and ensuring adequate protection and management over the long term. So I wanted to just explain what attributes are and why they're so important to the periodic reporting process from the point of view of the advisory bodies and the World Heritage Centre and the World Heritage Committee. So I've used a few cases that I've worked on myself from the Asian region, just to show you how it all fits together, I suppose. So when we talk about criteria, I'm sure many of you have seen many statements of this kind where we're running through criteria 3, 4, and 6 in this case of the spectacular landscape of Bagan in Myanmar. Don't know if anyone from Myanmar is here tonight. If so, warm hello. So Bagan was inscribed for these 3 criteria by the World Heritage Committee. I've summarized them a little bit just so you can see the main points of each of these criteria. So we're used to this kind of very high level commentary on why something might be of outstanding universal value. But then we need to consider the authenticity. And here I wanted to just show you this statement of authenticity because it's one of the statements we have which really talks about the fact that it's the landscape, the tangible or so-called tangible cultural heritage, the natural qualities of the landscape, and also the continuing religious and cultural traditions. And all of these make up the authenticity of Bagan. And so then we have to think about, well, what are the attributes of outstanding universal value of Bagan? And if I can explain it like this, that values are by their nature always intangible because you can't touch a value or taste a value. They are, it's a judgment by the present day society or community. But the attributes are the things that carry the values. And attributes can be tangible or intangible. These are the things we're going to really look at sustaining over time because they carry the value. So you can see here with Bagan that quite a number of things are the attributes of outstanding universal value. The overall setting, many landscape, landform and natural aspects of the area, the monuments, more than 3,000 monuments which are there, and many specific aspects, the inscriptions, murals, cloth paintings, sculptures, archaeological sites, and so on, water management features, artifacts, and the continuing religious and cultural practices. So these are the attributes of the World Heritage Property of Bagan. And this is included in the evaluation. And these are the things that need to be the subject of your thinking when you fill out the periodic reporting questionnaire in part 2. So just one more example. This one is perhaps a more typical type of cultural heritage site, although magnificent in every way. This is the Plain of Jars in the Lao People's Democratic Republic, inscribed a couple of years ago for criterion 3, so only one criterion was used to justify outstanding universal value. The authenticity of these many archaeological sites are based on form, design, materials, locations, of these archaeological expressions of past history in this area, the burials and archaeological deposits in these areas. And their settings are very, very important parts of their authenticity. And so when we look at attributes, we're looking at the megalithic jars themselves, the different elements that have been recorded, burials, human remains, grave markers, quarries, grave goods, manufacturing sites, and archaeological deposits, all set within this magnificent landscape, which has been used for this long span of human history in this part of Laos. So that's very quick, I know. It's probably raised as many questions as answers, but I wanted to just give you a few practical examples of how we move. We move from criteria, we move to authenticity and integrity, we move to attributes, and then we want to know about conservation, protection, and management. So please let us help you if you have any questions. I'm sure this will just be the first of many sessions where we might talk about these things. I'm very grateful for your time. I'll hand back to Clemens. And I should have said at the beginning of my presentation that I am talking to you tonight from the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people here in southeastern Australia, and recognise and acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging, as is our tradition here. So over to you, Clemens, to finish our joint presentation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Have to switch to many slides because it started at the beginning again. Apologies for that. Okay, no, it's too far. So you can see the slides again? Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Crystal, for giving this introduction to attributes. I will now go further and right into the periodic reporting questionnaire not necessarily to give you an example of what attributes can be, but how, with which methods you could approach this exercise to fill out this part in section 2. So the question 3.2 asks you to please list the key attributes of outstanding universal value of your property and give an assessment of their condition. As a guideline, it is suggested to focus on approximately 5 key attributes and no more than 15 overall. So you have this table with 15 fields which you can fill out, preferably only 5 key attributes, and then indicate the status of these attributes, whether they have been preserved, compromised, seriously compromised, or if they have even been lost. Yeah. One example, Bataha Reefs National Park in the Philippines. On that picture, you see some attributes from that site. So an attribute is not only an abstract concept, neither OUV is only an abstract concept. It often comes across as an abstract concept, but it always relates to very concrete places, elements, be they tangible or intangible. For natural heritage, typically tangible, like those species you see strolling around there. So for natural properties, in particular, attributes can include landscape features, habitats, aspects of environmental quality, such as the intactness I've mentioned previously, high pristine environmental quality, scale and naturalness of habitats, and size and viability of wildlife populations. So going back to this site, where can you find the statement of outstanding universal value? Usually you find that here in the decision adopted by the World Heritage Committee, where where the statement of outstanding universal value has been formally adopted. And I think now we've lost my slides. I will try to share that again and hope that it starts from the correct slide. I don't think you're seeing my slides now.
We're seeing the PowerPoint presentation open, but not the actual presentation mode.
Then you're seeing more than I do. So let me start that again. Okay, I suppose you're now seeing the PowerPoint surface. So I cannot see Teams anymore, but the presentation, and I think you see the presentation now again, right?
Yes.
So back to, thanks. Back to the statement of outstanding universal value adopted by the committee, which includes the sections as previously discussed, the brief synthesis, criteria, integrity, not authenticity in this case because it's a site only inscribed under natural criteria, and protection and management. So I've just taken a small extract of this text of this statement of outstanding universal value, and to start this exercise, you could simply go through the text step by step and simply highlight what are values, what are attributes. So here I'm suggesting values in bold and attributes underlined, and you see sometimes they can overlap. As a disclaimer, though, I'm just showing that now to present an approach, a method you can take to summarize and to identify the attributes of your site on which you're reporting. So in the details, there are many ways you could discuss here at technical levels, but I don't want to go into that here. This property is home to a great diversity of marine life. The diversity of marine life itself is an overarching attribute of this site. Then you have a list of species here, whales, dolphins, sharks, etc., that are also all attributes as shown on the picture. The reef ecosystem supports a very high number of species, more than 350 of coral and almost 500 species of fish. These counts could be also seen as an attribute of the property. Then you have one of the few remaining colonies of seabirds in the region. This was taken from the brief synthesis. Now I'm taking another extract from one of the criteria under which the site has been inscribed, in this case criteria 9, where underlined the process of reproduction, dispersal and colonization by marine organisms could be seen as an attribute as well. So here it's totally different from the attributes I've mentioned before. If this shark species is an attribute, it's a bit different from this process, which is a bit more, well, perhaps a bit more complex to capture and also to assess how this has developed. So, and you can go on like that. I will not list and repeat all of these values and attributes. The same for criterion 10, internationally threatened and endangered species. The corals, again, 11 species of sharks, estimates of species of fish. Just to support this argument, this case for the site, it is very important from a biodiversity perspective. It is globally significant and therefore of outstanding universal value. So if you then just list that in a table as a first step, the values and attributes, I mean, I've just taken 2 or 3 extracts from this statement of outstanding universal value, and the Tibet-Taha statement is a very concise and succinct one. It fits basically 1 or 2 pages, whereas other statement of outstanding universal values can also be much longer, counting 4 or 5 pages. So if you go through the text like that, with a quite significant list. So just taking these few sentences from this succinct statement of outstanding universal value just filled already 2 slides to work with. So if we would use that like that, our table in the periodic reporting questionnaire would already be full. So there's some more work that needs to be done. So these attributes need to be analyzed, reorganized, summarized. So if we look at the 2 top rows there, the diversity of marine life, whales, dolphins, sharks, etc. And in the second row, over 350 species of coral and almost 500 species of fish. You see, well, there might be a relation. Perhaps we could try to summarize that, to reorganize that for the purpose of the periodic reporting questionnaire. If you go to the second slide with attributes from the text, you see that the shark is really an element. Different species of sharks are an element that's mentioned several times. So perhaps there's also a way to summarize and reorganize the attributes to have a concise list of attributes for the periodic reporting questionnaire. So that is quite some analyzing work, and could also be subject to in-depth discussions with experts on the ground within the site management. So it's also in the introductory text in the periodic reporting questionnaire for this section that which suggests that establishing a hierarchy among attributes, that is to say, identifying which ones are crucial to convey the OUV and which ones may be considered complementary, could be a useful exercise also for the prioritization of management activities. So when you're going through this exercise to complete the periodic reporting questionnaire, it can be of high value also for other activities for the management of this site. So, and again, the objective 5 key attributes, in no case more than 15 overall. That's an important target here. So as a second step, what this analysis work is already suggesting is to perhaps specify what makes up the attributes mentioned in the statement of outstanding universal value. So listing these elements, mapping their location is also very important, as most natural attributes are not distributed evenly across a World Heritage site. Mapping their density within the property to identify key sites, key places within that property, which can be very important to assess then later on whether these attributes have been preserved or not. So gathering available data, species counts, observations from the ground, from the site management, research, remote sensing perhaps, and many other sources of information may be useful in that exercise. To then see what is the overall trend, what is the situation compared to the time of inscription. So that's a crucial point. It's important to go back to the time of inscription of the property, when the outstanding universal value of the property was confirmed, because that's our baseline. And how it has developed since then, how the attributes have developed since then, that needs to be benchmarked against the baseline of inscription to then be able to determine whether which of the categories in the periodic reporting questionnaires are met for each of the attributes. So whether they are preserved, compromised, seriously compromised, or lost. In the interest of time, I will not go into too much detail here. You will find this explanation of these categories also in the questionnaire itself. So it's basically reflecting a range of could perhaps also say unchanged since inscription, which would be preserved, to completely disappeared since inscription, which would be lost, with the categories compromised and seriously compromised in between. So we've both been talking a lot about benefits of breaking down attributes of OUV. So it's the periodic reporting exercise can be a useful opportunity to take a step back, look at the entire World Heritage Site again, recap why it was inscribed and how it has developed since inscription. So focus on the specific values and attributes of the World Heritage Site. It is a basis for assessing the condition of the site benchmarked against the date of inscription, and it may be used, as mentioned previously, to identify key management actions and also research needs, because if you look at the attributes I've previously mentioned, for many of them, there may not be any data, because it's quite complex to assess many of these attributes. So it can also be an opportunity to define research needs for the future. And of course, it's also an opportunity to communicate OUV and also inform environmental impact assessments of any projects in proximity of the site, for instance, the impacts on outstanding universal value. Just to conclude briefly, some further resources from the side of IUCN. So on the right-hand side, you see an important publication from the IUCN National Committee of Australia, where Christa has also contributed an article, Keeping the Outstanding Exceptional. On the left-hand side, you see our IUCN World Heritage Outlook 2, which is an assessment of all natural World Heritage sites. And we are also going to launch the 3rd edition of the World Heritage Outlook still this year. Finally, the red list of IUCN of threatened species can also be useful when looking at attributes that are species on the site. So just a brief overview of the World Heritage Outlook, where you can browse all the natural World Heritage sites and also look specifically at the sites in the Asia-Pacific region. It may be helpful to go to your respective site or sites on the World Heritage Outlook.iucn.org website, where you could also certainly get some ideas and inspiration how you could break down attributes, how the state of conservation of the site has been developing since 2014. This was the first time that the World Heritage Outlook has been launched. And obviously, and very importantly, the states parties reports, so your reports, reports to the sites, and previous decisions by the World Heritage Committee would be a very important source for that exercise as well as the SOC report working documents. So with that, I think we are slightly over time. Apologies for that, but thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Clemens, and Crystal for the excellent presentation. I believe that my colleague Valentino was going to give us a quick overview of the lessons learned from the other regions as well. As you all know, Asia and the Pacific is the 3rd region to undergo cycle 3, and so we already have experiences to share from the Arab states and the Africa regions. Valentino, the floor is yours.
So Valentino mentioned to me in a side chat that his microphone does seem out of service. Plus, there's some trouble with internet connections, and that he will send the lessons learned text to us. I believe either via email or via chat. I think in the meantime, while we wait for this, we can maybe open the floor to questions if there are any.
We do still have some presentation, Michel. Huh?
Oh, sorry, yes.
But okay, if Valentino can share his inputs via text, we're very happy as well to out just as we go. I just wanted to come back on a couple of points. Let me just share because the work that you've done in Chapter 3, of course, has some repercussions for the rest of your questionnaire. As we've seen, OUV is very much linked with every other aspect of World Heritage protection and management. I just wanted to come back to the statement of OUV very briefly. As you know, and Crystal and Clemens mentioned, most properties in Asia and the Pacific already have a statement of OUV, either at the time of inscription or retroactively. Any change to this statement of OUV would need to be approved by the World Heritage Committee. So when you validate or indicate that there is a need for update, please bear in mind that you cannot update OUV directly. If you click update, you will have a little guidance note on how to do so. But just as a hint, according to paragraph 155 of the operational guidelines, the protection and management parts of the statement of OUV may be updated by the committee. The idea was that these statements would never need to be updated in the original idea. The reality is such that because the committee decided to include protection and management requirements in the statement, these obviously benefit from changes in legislation and in management settings and practices, and so we have introduced modalities for these to be updated. They can be made periodically, or they can be made further to the outcomes of the PR cycles, or at any committee session if required. All you need is to present a draft to the World Heritage Center, which will then be reviewed by the advisory bodies, and upon agreement will be presented for adoption to the committee. In those cases where there has been a name change or a minor, and I emphasize minor, boundary modification, the center itself takes care of updating the statement of OUV and any information contained within that, because it's part of our statutory duties, and it doesn't actually affect the statement of OUV as such. It's just an update of statutory information. And finally, for minor issues, grammatical errors, typos, and the like, the center has the right to introduce the changes itself. You can reach out to us at any point for this. There are necessarily in these texts occasionally there's the odd mistake, and we're very happy to help you correct this, but it needs to not affect the content of the statement itself, just very formal questions. So in terms of implication of all the work that you've done to define attributes, and perhaps a note on the process of it, it's defining the attributes of a World Heritage property is not something that can be done by a single person. It is the result of a collaborative effort, and this does hammer in the point as well that the filling out the PR questionnaire is not something that can be done either particularly quickly or in isolation, even in 2020. This is a great opportunity to reach out to all the stakeholders, not just between national focal points and site managers, but also with local communities, with anyone who has a say in this, and to have a look at the statement of OUV and to try and define together the attributes. there shouldn't be a scenario where at the last minute a national focal point discovers that attributes have been invented for a property without consultation at the last moment. And I think it's ideal to engage as early as possible in the process of defining the attributes of OUV, because it will guide the entire rest of the reporting exercise. So having made this point, let me just go back. You will find echoes to these definitions of OUV and attributes throughout the questionnaire. The first one that you will find, and we have a dedicated section on this because it is a relatively substantial part of section 2. It's chapter 4, which is on the factors affecting the property. At the end of chapter 4, when you have defined the factors that affect the property and you have identified them, you will have to assess these factors. And chapter 4.16 takes you through an automated table that will have you rate and indicate how these factors affect the property. There you go. I have 2 examples. I hope you can somewhat see them. It takes you through a number of rating scales. We will, as I said, go through this in more detail in the session, not next session, but the one after. But the important part is this one. There will be an indication for each factor that affects the property, whether it impacts on the attributes of OUV and to what extent. So this you can only fill out if you have defined your attributes of OUV. And we do not, at this stage specifically, ask you to identify which attribute of OUV, but obviously it is a question that can only be answered if attributes have been identified. Chapter 4 also has question 4.18, which is the outlook into the future for the state of conservation of the property. And it asks you to predict what the state of conservation of each attribute will be approximately 6 years from now. And this requires you to list the top 5 attributes that you have identified in chapter 3, pick them up again, and indicate whether they are preserved, compromised, seriously compromised, or lost. You will see that it's a table that's very reminiscent to the one from chapter 3, which is structured essentially around the same. And you also understand why we strongly suggest that you have attributes at the most, even though we give you the opportunity of having 15, because it's easiest to concentrate on a few core elements, and as Clemens and Crystal explained, to potentially reorganize, compared to the statement of OUV, into core elements and sort of reformulate them in a concise manner. So chapter 4 will benefit from even more explanation, but just to say that chapter 3 does not exist in isolation at all. And it also has implications for chapter 12, which is summary and conclusions, again on the factors affecting the property. And this time it's a slightly different exercise. It pulls the results from chapter 4 and asks you to elaborate on them. And as you can see here, we have taken one of the factors affecting the property. So it pulls from question 410, and climate change and severe weather events have been identified. This is taken from our demo questionnaire as a factor identifying the property, specifically storms. And you will see that you will need to identify the criteria, which relates to the statement of OUV, and the attributes that are affected by this specific factor, and to give a series of things, which is to say, you will need to define, you'll see on the little tabs next to criteria, the actions, the monitoring actions, the time frame for this action, the agency responsible, and provide, if needed, any comments on this. So again, the work that you do in chapter 3 echoes in chapter 4, which is picked up in chapter 12. So it is truly a red thread that goes through the entire questionnaire. And will go as well, chapter 12 being linked to chapter 4, will receive a bit more love and attention at one of the upcoming sessions. But drives home again the point that the better your OUV and attributes are defined in the questionnaire, the easier it will be for the rest of your reporting. On chapter 5, we have a question on boundaries and buffer zones. We will have a specific session dedicated to this. I believe it is early next year. We do have a question that considers attributes and OUV. Question 511 asks you whether the boundaries of the property are adequate to maintain the OUV. And I believe there is question 513, which asks you whether the buffer zones are adequate to maintain the OUV. Again, the more clearly the OUV is defined, the easier it is to answer this question, but we'll also go back on this specific point in detail when we discuss boundaries and buffer zones. And finally, this ties into a point that I believe Clemens raised earlier, that OUV doesn't exist in isolation. It's a process, but it's also an idea of things to study and to delve into more detail over time and as things evolve, and especially with regard to research. So chapter 7, which deals with scientific studies and research projects, asks you at the very beginning whether there is adequate knowledge, both scientific and traditional, which again may be a good opportunity for outreach, about the values and attributes of World Heritage property to support planning, management, and decision-making to ensure that OUV is maintained, and you will be asked to rate this. And question 7.2 asks you whether there is a planned program of research which is directed toward management's needs and or improving understanding of the OUV. And so the clearer your understanding of OUV is, the easier it is to answer these questions positively. And if they can also provide you with inspiration of things to do, that is very welcome. So this is also an important element where the definition of OUV and attributes ties into the rest of the questionnaire. And I believe that's about it for me on this question. I don't know if Valentino has had the opportunity to share with us his inputs. I haven't seen anything. But otherwise, we will share them in. We will add a slide to the presentation as we share it, summarizing the lessons learned. Michel, did you have something from Valentino?
Valentino mentioned that his connection's better, so let's see if he's able to talk. Valentino. It seems like no, and I do not think I've received anything from him yet.
Okay, well then let's just add a slide to the presentation as we share it with everyone later. We hope to always share the videos and presentations within the sort of next 24 hours or so after a session. So we'll add that to the presentation. I think now would be a good time to start opening the floor for any questions that you may have. So please, if you have any questions, you are very free to ask them. We're still around for a good 10-15 minutes. Or have we left everyone absolutely speechless?
If you do have a question, you can write it in chat, or you can use the raise hand function, which should be in the upper right-hand section of the Teams screen. So.
And just a note as well that, of course, if you have any question after this meeting, or if you watch this video after the meeting has ended, you can always send us questions at wh-periodic reporting. You can reach out through the Teams platform or through any other means. You have received all of our contacts time and time again. But feel free to reach out at any point. We will forward any specific questions as well to the content support team. so that you may so that they may also provide inputs. So we're not just available during this short period of time, but this is an ongoing effort, and we're there to support you. And again, throughout the exercise, we do have, between our advisory bodies, our Category 2 centers, our field offices, we have a whole network of people who can help you if you have questions for your specific property about the definition of attributes. We can absolutely lend a bit of a guiding hand for it if needed. So do not hesitate to reach out about this. We have a question about pre-fills. Let me see. So some questions read, this information will be pre-filled by the World Heritage Center, and you can't see information in the text box. If information is available in our database, which is to say that if a property has undergone the exercise in previous cycles, or in some cases if it relates to statutory information, the questionnaire automatically pulls this data from either the previous cycle or our records. If there is no information, it may be that the property in question, the questionnaire, relates to something that hasn't been answered before. Let's have a look. So 534, which is, let me share my screen. That will be the easiest. So as a little reminder, you have the navigation at the top of the questionnaire that lets you access any question in particular. Right, 534, which concerns management documents. Just as a side note, there is a section on management plans that is scheduled for next year, which I think will be very interesting. It is scheduled, if I recall correctly, before the submission deadline for section 2, so that we may all go through this. Usually, so if a management document has been submitted to the World Heritage Center and has been shared with us, it is on our website, it is on the tab Documents for the respective property, it should show up here. If there is none, or if none is registered, then it is not in here, and you have the possibility of providing a comment, and you can, Valentino may want to clarify this before, but to my knowledge, you can send us this information once you're done filling out the questionnaire. But this may require just some final clarification from the people who have created the questionnaire. So this information is pulled. Do check in the Documents tab, go to the Properties page and check the Documents tab. If the management plan or the management document in question is in there and it is not reflected in here, do send us a message, and we'll see if there might be a slight hiccup in the questionnaire. But in theory, all statutory information that we have goes into the management documents and gets pulled automatically. So if you don't have a management plan, if you don't have a management plan yet, rather than uploading a draft, I think that it's best if you indicate that it is under preparation in the questionnaire. You can absolutely share drafts with the advisory bodies via the World Heritage Center for comments and review, provided that they have the capacity to review it. I'm sure that they'll be thrilled to do so. Yes, the question for uploads, I will defer, and I will ask Valentino to add this in the slides that he puts on the questionnaire, because I don't want to say anything that the questionnaire doesn't actually let you do in the end. But in my understanding is that you have an opportunity to share with us any documents that may not be in our system yet. Another question regarding attributes. Valentino, I know that you can't speak, but if you want to provide some inputs on lessons learned from Arab states and Africa. So you cannot take a look at the questionnaire of other regions just yet because the reports aren't out. You can, however, take a look at the previous reports from your APA and from your own state party and properties from cycle 2. If that helps, all the reports have been published either in the paper series or in committee documents. In fact, in both, in our case, for cycle 1 and cycle 2. So all of this information is summarized in previous presentations and also on the periodic reporting page on our website.
Valentino seems like he's online, yes?
I don't know if you can hear me. If you can hear
Yes.
me, it means that I'm trying to connect by my phone. So one of the most essential, but I think it's already been covered partly by Clemens, partly by you, Anatole, is concerning questions 3.2, where in the first, at the beginning, where you have the list of attributes you need to identify, at least 5, maximum 15. And then you have to report it in question 4.18. I think Anatole, you have a slide having shown that. But you have one of the lessons that you should be careful that when you transfer it, I mean, you have to copy the same attributes and put it in the same slide and same question 4.18, not combining attributes or try to do the attribute listed the same way you are putting it. You have to put it the same way in the question 4.18 because this is not it's not automatic. Yeah, this is question 4.18, and the 5 identified attributes should be the same one and not new ones. No combination of different attributes identified in question 3.2. I don't know if I just arrived when you were talking about management plan. We cannot upload management plans directly into the questionnaire. You can send it to the World Trade Center with the normal procedures. So that we could have the management plan uploaded for the next cycle. This is it from my side. There is another point also I wanted to say, but I don't have my slide with my PowerPoint with me, so it is concerning. I will stop here for the time being.
Okay, thank you very much, Valentino. So uploads, the old-fashioned way. If you want to share something, please email it to us, and we'll be sure to share it with the intended recipients. On the question of training material for attributes, well, you first of all, you can share this session. The link that we share is available with everyone, for everyone, including site managers. So it's not limited to the Teams platform. We make sure that the uploads are available also to site managers, and you have the handbook for site managers that is published by the World Heritage Center, which is a free download from our website on the periodic reporting platform on the WHC website. And you have then a number of resource materials, including, I believe, the nominations guidance materials that do also cover questions of attributes of OUV. So you should have, you have more. If you have a specific questions, again, please don't hesitate to ask.
Yeah, another.
There's a question on complex heritage sites, serial sites. So it's the same rule applies for serial properties as it does for all other aspects of the questionnaire. Serial or serial transnational properties are filled out by one single site manager, cooperation with all of the parties involved. That means that the attributes also need to reflect all component sites of the serial property. That may be an occasion where you may have to go above 5 attributes, but do bear in mind that only 5 feed into other parts of the questionnaire. So if you can, prioritize, but they should reflect, and if you can avoid, especially there are serial properties that have a lot of component sites. So not to have an attribute for every single component site, but rather, as the advisory bodies advise, to sort of reshape and reorganize the attributes in a streamlined way, so that they cover more than one component site. Usually, if it's a serial property, it means that they have some relation with each other, and they should have attributes in common. Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, Anadol?
Yes, fine.
Yeah, I think I add 2 points on first on the serial transnational or serial sort of sites. But by definition, serial properties are one property. So I think it's treated as one property, either it's a serial within the national boundary or serial transboundary. I think in the fulfilling the periodical reporting requirement, it should be treated as one. I think Clemens made very clear in his presentation on this application of values, attributes. You need to get analysis. I think a sort of a desk review analysis exercise by the site managers and all the partners, including other stakeholders like the communities. I think this is important to use this occasion to get one sort of one concise attributes for the serial property. Now, for the training material, I think Anadolu is very precise. We have a manual on the nomination guidance manual. I think that is still valid for checking the values, attributes, and all the things. I think this could be a good, very useful guidance and the training material. So thank you. I stop here.
Thank you very much, Fang. And just to go back on a question that is not related to UV, but a good practical question. Translations of the questionnaire, the guiding materials, if you have them, please do share them with us. We have been putting translations, notably of the handbook online on the website as well. So do share them with us, and we will be sure to share them with everyone and make them accessible. Obviously, as a caveat, only the 2 official languages of the convention, English and French, are the sort of official texts. But we have quite a few versions that are either under finalization or have already been shared. So if you have any national language texts, do feel free to share them with us, and we'll try and make them as available as possible. And again, if you have any questions after this meeting, don't hesitate to share them with us. But I think that as we're a little bit over our time, perhaps Fang, you want to close the meeting, and we can answer everything else on the Teams platform or in writing.
Yeah, I think it's worth speaking a few words. First of all, I think now it's the special period or special phenomena of 2020. I think it's a great term called new normal. This morning's meeting was not easy because considering the context that all colleagues of the World Health Center and colleagues in Europe are mostly under this reconfinement. And I think there are problems like internet connection and also other sort of logistic problems. But anyway, this year for the launch of the periodical reporting in Asia and the Pacific region, we tried as the experimental sort of experience, the online capacity building and the training. It's indeed an additional workload for us, but first of all, I should thank my colleagues at the center who made efforts to do this, and also a special word of thanks to colleagues from the advisory bodies, ICMOS and IUCN, particularly Krista Buckley, old friend, and also Clemens Cooper from IUCN. I think some of the keywords from although time is, I think they're interesting, but I think some of the keywords from their presentations is that the concept of OUV is given substance by applying the criteria set out in the operational guidelines. I think this is very clear. There are also, I think, the 3 pillars of the OUV vis-a-vis criteria, authenticity, and integrity, protection management. I think these are also important components to reflect during your reporting process. And of course, OUV is linked to values, and OUV has also evolved over time, and where OUV is in principle applied through criteria and also via the vis-a-vis attributes of the property. I think I really like this practical way of Clemens and Krista analyzing the application of OUV and also using the questionnaire as a sort of case law to show. I think that I hope that will really give you first-hand and practical information, how to go ahead with the completion of the questionnaire, and also still I think consult with the other partners through the process, and also make analysis of the OUV and its relation with the attributes, both tangible and intangible. In the coming weeks, we will continue to hold these subject-specific training sessions on the contents of the questionnaire, and also invitations will be shared with you ahead of time. The next session on the 19th of November will be dedicated to the synergies between the World Heritage Convention and the other programs and the conventions at the UN level or at even within UNESCO. I think this is another key reporting point in both sections of the questionnaire. And once again, thank you very much for your active participation, and look forward to meeting you on the 19th of November. Thank you very much. Hope you have a nice day or nice evening, and also all the best wishes. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Okay, please take care and stay safe.